It is our pleasure to have here for this panel the writers Paro Anand, Madhurima Vidyarthi, and Malini Mukherjee, who actually works with children very closely and develops their creativity, as does Paro, though she may not be strictly a writer for children. And along with the three women who are one way or another working directly with children and with writing for them, we also have the privilege of having art historian R. Sivakumar, who is going to talk to us about a series of very, very interesting animated films for children, which the foundation he is involved with has been creating out of books written by artists for children. A whole series of these films is now available, and it was our pleasure to see a few of them, and we have selected two to be shared today. One is made out of a book by K.G. Subramanyan, and the other is made out of a book by A. Ramachandran. After we see these films, Sivakumar himself will talk to us a little bit about the project, what it's trying to do, and why he feels it's important in terms of creating material for children in the field of literature and film. The moderator for the session is Ms. Oindrilla Dutt.
Dakia, the mailman. Many years ago in India, when there were no trains, buses and cars, the mail used to be carried on horseback. The mailman was called Dakia. He had to carry the mail from one place to another. The journey was difficult because he had to cross many hills and jungles. One day, Dakia was carrying mail when he heard strange noises from far off. Suddenly, flocks of parrots flew past him, crying in great alarm. They were followed by a group of peacocks, shrieking in panic. Herds of deer galloped by in fear. Foxes ran as fast as they could. Bisons and wild boars were stomping past in a great hurry. Trumpeting elephants went by in great haste. Why are all these birds and animals fleeing in panic? The astonished Dakia asked himself. Dakia saw thick black smoke rising from a distance. "There's a forest fire!" Dakia cried. Just as he was thinking of changing his course, he heard the pitiable cry of an animal. Without caring for his own safety, Dakia rushed towards the fire and found a little tiger cub trapped inside the flames. Dakia swiftly jumped over the fire, lifted the tiger cub and galloped to safety. The little cub was not hurt much, except for a slight burn on the tail. Dakia tore a piece of cloth from his turban and tied the burnt tail. Then he hugged the little cub with affection and set him free. Many years passed. Dakia became an old man. But he continued to carry mail as before. One day, while traveling in the forest, Dakia was attacked by a huge and ferocious tiger. The tiger climbed on the fallen Dakia and looked into his eyes. In great fright, Dakia thought, "My end has come." Then something very strange happened. He started licking Dakia's face with great affection. When the huge tiger walked away, wagging its tail, the astonished Dakia noticed a black patch on the tail. It was the same little cub he had saved from the forest fire many years back. How Poppy grew happy. Though it was a fine day, Poppy felt mopey. So, a sparrow came and sat near her and said, "Cheer up!" "What?" asked Poppy crossly. "I said, 'Cheer up,'" said the sparrow. "What is there to cheer up for?" said Poppy in anger. "Pop went to office without giving me a pat. And Mom forced me to drink that gooey glass of milk." She was in tears. The sparrow chuckled and said, "Is that something to mope about? There are a lot of things on such a day to feel nice about. Come out and I will show you. But before that, put a neat smile on." "But how?" whined Poppy. "This is how," showed the sparrow. "We are dull birds," said the sparrow. "But I will show you some far prettier than us." Then he showed a parrot. "Is that a parrot?" marveled Poppy. "She looks so much like Mom, with all that green silk and red lips." Then the sparrow showed her a peacock, all set with sequins, he seemed. "Is he dressed up for a wedding?" asked Poppy. Then the sparrow showed the butterflies, white streaked with yellow, red circled with blue, black checkered with orange. They were bright and playful and always on the move, now in the air, now on the flower, now near, now so far away. Then she came to the flowers, the bushy roses, the gaudy canna, the drooping dahlias, and she gasped with pleasure. Then she saw the squirrel. "Squirry, squirry," she called and ran after them. The squirrel was too quick. He ran up a tree with his tail in the air. Then he wiggled his nose at her. Poppy laughed. Poppy was happy. She forgot her blues. She forgot even the sparrow.
Good evening, everyone. It's great to be here again for a physical live session in this fourth edition of Nabanna Earth Weekend, the new festival. I'll quickly introduce the panelists for this session. Future Perfect Writing for Citizens of Tomorrow. Madhurima Vidyarthi, just to my right. She's an endocrinologist, trained in Calcutta and London, and a fellow of the Royal College of Physicians, UK. She's always been passionately committed as a writer. Over the years, she has written in many formats, but her enduring love has always been fiction. Her first book, My Grandmother's Masterpiece, has just been published. That's the book. To her right, Malini Mukherjee is an educator by profession. She's the founder of Udaan, a community of kids and parents where children come together to learn, teach, and have fun, which has published books for and by children. Malini has written and directed several nonsense plays for Udaan and other children's groups. Malini Mukherjee. To my left, Paro Anand. She writes for children, young adults, and adults. She won the Sahitya Akademi Bal Sahitya Puruskar in 2017 for her anthology Wild Child, now published as Like Smoke. She has spoken about and written extensively on children's literature in India. She headed the National Center for Children's Literature, the National Book Trust India. She also runs a podcast on HubHopper called Literature in Action and was awarded the Kalinga Karubaki Award for Fearless Writing 2019. She's well known for her work with children in difficult circumstances, including those impacted by violence in Kashmir, and has written extensively on the subject. R. Sivakumar, a historian, art critic, curator of contemporary art. His major research has been in the area of early Indian modernism with special focus on the Shantiniketan school. He has written several important books, lectured widely on modern Indian art, and contributed articles to prestigious international projects. He was awarded the Kesri Puruskaram for art writing by the Lalit Kala Akademi, Kerala in 2010. He has also curated major exhibitions like Shantiniketan, The Making of a Contextual Modernism, and The Last Harvest, paintings of Rabindranath Tagore, as well as retrospectives of important Indian artists such as Rabindranath Tagore, Binod Bihari Mukherjee, co-curated with Ghulam Muhammad Sheikh, KG Subramanyan. I'm going to start with Shiv Kumar. We saw these two delightful films for which you've done that animation. So tell me, Shiv Kumar, what we saw the lessons there. We saw the messages, wonderful lessons for today about kindness in the way we deal with the environment, with animals. What is it that you look for when you are animating for them, when you are doing that animation? What is the hook?
Well, a little correction that I didn't do the animation. What we did, we facilitated. We got this done with the team because the FIEA, which is this foundation, which is based in Goa, we are interested in art education. That's one of our areas, and we work across the spectrum from very young children to art colleges and beyond. So that's our idea. So we have been doing various workshops for school teachers, art teachers in schools, how to deal with children, what can we do with them, how to introduce art to them, and so on. So during the pandemic, real face-to-face training and interaction was not possible. And then we thought one of the things we can do is create visual material that can be made available to anyone who wants to use it and share with children and so on. It is also based on this idea that, first of all, we don't have much by way of art education in Indian art schools. The few places you have some kind of art classes or activities, they are either based on coloring books, which is terrible because they are more like a drill rather than liberating children in an imaginative way. So the other thing, which is considered to be more informed, advanced, even avant-garde, is to fill their minds with all kinds of information, history and theory of art, and which is also rather weird because it's like teaching the theory of music if somebody wants to sing. So it's completely gone. I mean, really, that would be useful maybe at a much later stage, but not for young children. So how do you approach young children? The whole thing that we should be doing is to do something that they feel comfortable with, that they are not intimidated by, and also make them ready to look at the world and experience art. Maybe all of them won't become great artists, but they can all be people who can respond to art. And so that was our idea. And also we thought that what visual kind of material is available, and a lot of it is available. Now, all of us are bombarded in a sense with visual images. But a lot of that is based on an aesthetics of realism. And even when the stories are fantasies, the whole visual language is based on realism. And that is a limitation because we have a tradition which is very rich and varied. I mean, across the world, there are other traditions which are also equally rich and varied. And the great part of it is not based on this aesthetics of realism, which means we are also alienating our children by feeding them with one kind of material from all the other possibilities they have, from all the other visual languages they can access. So that is where we thought that these two artists are particularly interesting, and we decided to work with them. As you have seen with Subramanyan, that he takes up very bold graphic images and adds a tremendous amount of animation into the images, even if the image in a book. And Ramachandran kind of uses various folk and very easily available technique. I mean, his other books, he used paper cut as a medium. In other books, he has used Madhubani painting, Warli painting, or things, Paitani paintings, and many other things like that. So each book is in a different style, which is like going through this, it paves the children because it's also bound with a story. So it's also about communicating using visuals. So once they are introduced to visuals in this manner, maybe going ahead, they will be able to respond to art, which is extremely diverse. And they won't stand in front of this, what is this? How does it communicate? But or why it's not realistic, but they would probably know how to respond to these things. And that was the purpose of having them. And as you might have noticed, you saw Bengali subtitles. We have done it in two versions, English and Hindi. And besides that, we have subtitled it in 10 different languages so that it is available. And we have put it on our YouTube channel. So any teacher, parent who wants to use this is free to use it.
I just wanted to ask you, when you say anybody's free to use it, is it also sent out to school children?
We haven't started, we have just completed it.
Okay.
Because when we again go back to the schools, we'll take that, and we will also probably thinking of making packages of visual material, which is meant for different age groups and so on and so forth. So that depends on funding. Of course, during this period, we got a very handsome funding from the Malini Mukherjee Foundation, which is a foundation in the memory of Malini Mukherjee, the sculptor who died a couple of years back, who is also the daughter of Vinod Bihari, who was a teacher here. So they gave us a very handsome kind of grant, and that made it possible. So we're looking forward, if we get more grants, we'll do more books and turn them into films, and also reach out to schools and take our project.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Sivakumar. Thank you. And I'm going to start with you, Paro. Children's books, they're wonderful because they transport you to another world. In fact, many worlds. That is what's so great about them. At the same time, they teach you how to differentiate between reality and what is a make-believe. So they take you to many cultures, they expose you to them, they open up many lands, many people, and you write about children, you write for children, you write for young adults and adults. So tell us about what makes you choose the subjects that you do, like being Gandhi, and tell us how efficacious you think children's literature is in shaping characters of children.
It's a great question and a very wide question. So I think that books need to do all of these things, take you away from the reality, but also mirror your reality. I largely write reality fiction. I started out writing sort of cute, sweet, funny stories. I started out as a writer. Actually, I knew I could be a writer when I was in class 7. And I told this elaborate lie in school. And while I was making it up, standing in front of my whole class, I thought, wow, Paro, you're really good at this. And I knew I could be a writer. But over the years, and because I've been working very closely with children, especially children in difficult circumstances, I've worked with over 3 lakh children. What they want also is themselves represented. They don't only want to be taken away, they also want to be found in stories, and they want their stories told to others in different circumstances. So a lot of my writing is based and informed by the kind of interactions that I have with young people, let's say in Kashmir, who are growing up in the midst of conflict, have been born into conflict. I wrote 2 books, one called No Guns at My Son's Funeral. While writing that, I realized that there was another story there of No Guns is about a 12-year-old who becomes a terrorist, is seduced into. While researching, I realized there are those families of terrorists who are not being given any support by government, NGOs, anyone. And there was this terrible term called half orphans and half widows. I mean, that you are identified as half a person. And it was so objectionable. And I knew that that was a story that needed to be written. When I was talking about these 2 books, in fact, in Bangalore, a child in the audience stood up, a young girl, and said, "You've not written about girls and you've not written about the Kashmiri Pandit story." So then I wrote Nomad's Land, which is about being driven out and becoming a refugee. And I also made up a whole other tribe of people, their language, their customs, and all of that. So that weaving of fantasy and reality to make what is called, I suppose the best term is reality fiction, is what I do and what I enjoy doing.
I'm going to come back to you with something related to this about adult themes in children's literature, like violence, like displacement, etc. But first, I wanted to ask Madhurima. You know, she talked about reality, representation of children in their literature. And you've written that book, which is about Nini Ma, and Mini Ma, the grandmother. And that is about themselves. That's also something very important, a lesson about how you look at older people, which is so important today, especially in our world. It's a little different in the West, perhaps, that you're never too old to be successful, to achieve, to self-actualize, to find something that is your calling and you could be good at, not to be dismissed. So tell us about that process. What made you do that? Did you experience that? Is that something?
It was something that I had noticed on and off. It came to a head, I think it started brewing after I got married, because, everybody tells their stories, and I had these stories in the family. My mother-in-law who loved art but couldn't pursue her passion, and then we went away for many, many years. We came back, and then I found this place which actually ran art lessons for adults and older people. So so we sort of arranged it that she should attend, and it was very nice. And she actually joined first, and the children joined later. And although it wasn't as if it wasn't great shakes, but I could see she was happy. And much later, many, many years later, in the pandemic, I was writing something else, something much more serious. And this line came into my head, which said, which was the first line, and it said, "This is the story of how my grandmother became a famous artist." And that's how it begins. And that and the title occurred to me very spontaneously. And then obviously I went on to write it and plan it. And I had to have a very dramatic ending. And there had to be this sense of achievement which equated to a monetary return, because obviously that is how worth is measured in our society. It's very unfortunate, but that's how it happens. And it doesn't always happen like that in real life. But the fact that a hobby that one is passionate about needs vindication is, I think, a reflection on the way we think. That I could spontaneously put in a lot of elements that I then noticed in many families that I knew, not even mine. And what is very heartening is that people have come up to me and said, "Why are you calling this a book for children?" So that is very encouraging, because obviously it's resonated with many people.
Absolutely. I think one very important thing that comes out of the book is this attitude we have towards older people. Your lives are done. What, as the grandfather says, what rubbish is going on? I mean, what is she going to do? And we dismiss them. And there may be so many unfulfilled, unvoiced dreams and hopes that they have. That comes across beautifully, which takes us to another question about how books, writing for children, books can induce empathy for people, for nature, as we saw from those films, from animals. That's one of the big things that they do. They teach you to be more inclusive, to be less judgmental. Talk to us a little about these positives when we're looking at building the citizens of tomorrow.
Yeah.
And books, writing, having a really positive role to play in it. That is one of the big things, attributes that reading can inculcate in you.
Well, when I started about, I guess, 14 years back, it was not so much planned, if I may say. It was just from my son's drive, who was about 2.5 years old, and we realized that there were two things which he was glued to. One was drawings, because he could, in any given day, he could draw about 100 hathis and 200 muigis and, all, 50 moyus, and that he would do. And the other thing were the stories. And trust me, I told him everything from Panchatantra to Shakespeare by the time he was, because every day you have to narrate a story. And he would go, Taipoi. Taipoi is like Tarpor. What after that? So, I have to deliver. So that need drove me to start writing the stories. Now, when I start, and these stories practically existed all around us. I would like to read one story which so much relates to what Madhurima has written, and you were just mentioning. But yeah, what I would like to say is that stories are a very difficult thing. We say cinema mate bolte, don't underestimate the power of a common story. So I say difficult because if you consider, it is that one story about a mythological king being born somewhere, and that space being occupied by some another religion, which we'll have to reclaim, which turned the entire nation. So a story, as I was watching the Chimamanda, Nigerian author, speak at a TED talk very recently, and she was talking about this one-sided story, the dangers of one-sided story. So when we are writing for very small children, I think even then we have to be really careful. So what is the right story? And the moment I say what is the right story, it almost sounds like I'm a rightist, and we'll have to pick that one right story, so which I don't want to do. So we are talking about the possibilities. I started writing about possibilities. What are the possibilities? This is your story, this is my story, but there could be something else out there. So just now, as I was listening to Gayatri, she was talking about this independent thinking. So independent think would not come when I tell one story. It will come when we are talking about pluralism, when we are talking about the diverse nature of storytelling. So যখন আমি লেখা শুরু করলাম, I started writing about this, what we call in Bangla সম্ভাবনা কি হতে পারে। তুমি যদি আমি বইটা দাও, I'll just read 1 or 2 stories. So even for the very small kids, by the way, these are the doodles which will probably make some sense or no sense for these are created by a 2.5-year-old. আর আমি যে গল্পটা পড়ছি সেটা না not ইচ্ছেপুলি, দাদু, because we are just talking about that. So this is Binnider Bari, and everything absurd happens in there. Everything could happen in Binnider Bari. So there's this one cow, Kalaboti, and he's very fond of the murgi, the michri, and michri lays egg every day. And Kalaboti is, she wants to lay an egg. She would really want to lay an egg. And one day they find a very big egg in the, where, what do you call it? Where the cow shed, right? So guess whose egg that was? So our audience is not answering. My children would. Okay. So I'm reading Dadu. Binni Dadur boyish kiu jane na. দাদুর হাঁটু ঠক ঠক, পা লগবগ, কান কটকট, মাথায় টাক, চোখে চশমা, দাঁত নেই প্রায় আমার মতো অবস্থা। দাদুর মনে ভারী দুঃখ, তাই দাদু ঠিক করেছে আর বুড়ো হবে না। সো দিস ইজ দ্য পসিবিলিটি। দাদু তাই মাংস কড়মড় করে খায়, বিন্নিদের সাথে ঘুড়ি ওড়ায়, নানা রকম করে চুলে টেরি কাটে। আমি চশমাটা পড়িনি বলে দেখতে পাচ্ছি না। পুজোর সময় ধুনচি নাচে, দাদুর জুড়ি মেরা ভার। So that is it. So Dadu turns around. So we are talking about, when you're talking about empathy, I have not really thought so much directly about empathy, but I have given every story in this book has a possibility.
In fact, that's the other big thing. Any kind of writing, books, the wonderful thing is that it allows you to dream. Even when you're reading a paragraph, which is a description, you're imagining the way it looks to you. And each adult's interpretation is different. That is something that I find, and I think most writers will agree, when you're watching something on screen, you're told this is what it is. Your imagination stops. So that was wonderful.
I would just like to mention, so this went on this journey with Uran, which is a community of children and their parents, and we developed this many books. I wish I could show you all the covers of the books. You would see how uninhibited the way they draw, and when they start writing, how inhibited it is. The stories have, so much possibilities. And then when my son grew up, and it's a mother turned into an author, So one day he came up to me and said, it's like the world has come to an end. So I said, what happened? So all the Shunkus, the character which we are so fond of by Satyajit Ray, so he had read all this. So what next? But there aren't anymore. I said, no, beta, there aren't. Could we not do anything? So, as a mother, I felt obliged to bring back Shunku. So last year I published this thing where, the possibility of bringing back Shunku, but then again, being someone who thinks herself responsible towards the environment. So I thought, so let me bring into the element of environment into it. So, and then I started exploring the idea of how Gach, trees, plants are important to us. And what happens to a future, these are all sci-fis, what happens to a future where there is no trees? So all the stories, what could have happened if there had been trees or no trees? And although some of them are thrillers, half thrillers, sci-fi and all this, but at the heart of it, what I tried to explore is, the possibilities of a future without the kind of things which we see around us. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Malini. I want to come back to you before I go to Madhurima again. You know, I wanted to ask you, because you mentioned the themes of Kashmir, which bring in violence, etc. Now, when you look at a book like Aragon, for example, it's meant to be for children. I definitely think that it would be disturbing for a lot of even adults, but it is wonderful. The messages that it conveys, that's wonderful. So basically, I'm asking you, how pertinent is it to have adult themes in literature? Because the fight between good and evil, the triumph of good over evil, is going to be eternal. That is a wish, that is something we want to convey. And whether it's Harry Potter, the series, Enid Blyton, Tolkien on a much more advanced, adult, darker level, or Aragon and much more, that's relevant.
I think children from quite a young age are actually already grappling with a lot of adult themes and ideas. They're already faced with it. And I just wanted to share one instance where I had told a couple of stories to a group of children, a ghost story and a story on domestic violence. After the storytelling was over, all the children went away. One girl hung back to ask a question, and she asked a question that is very commonly asked. Is this other stories true? And I said, what do you think? Are the stories true or not? And she said, the ghost story, definitely not. But the one about where the Bhabhi is being beaten, that is 100% true. So I said, how do you say with such confidence that that one is true? She looked at me and she said, because it happens in my own home. By which time children had come back from their snack, and many confessed to being witness to domestic violence in their own homes, neighborhoods, extended families. And the discussion that emanated from that was so powerful. Now, if a teacher was to go into a class and say, is somebody being beaten up in your house? Is your mother being beaten up? Of course, nobody would answer. But because there's that safety net of story, a child can be more forthright because it's once removed into fantasy or into fiction. But I slowly brought it back to reality and said, how do you feel? And they all felt helpless. They hated it, but felt helpless. And so I went on to write another story of empowering a child, you know. Similarly, my own daughter once picked up a book which I hadn't read, and she started reading it. She was about 10-year-old, and it was a big, thick book. And she said, Mama, you don't read this book. So I said, okay. I said, why? She said, because I'll feel very embarrassed that you read this book and you'll know I read it. So I said, okay. Halfway through, she says, Mama, you must read this book. So I said, why? And she said, because there are questions that I have, but I can only ask them once you've read it. Now, of course, I'm very curious, also sweating bullets. I don't know what she's going to ask and how am I going to answer. And I'm thinking it's probably a love story. And at the end of the book, I'm sitting with her. She shuts the book when she finishes. And she says, Mama, you must read this book. And I said, why? She said, it's a very important book. So I started reading it, thinking it's a love story. And to my horror at that time, because she's 10 years old, she says, it's the love story between a boy and an older man, and quite explicit. And I'm really sweating now because I don't know how I'm going to answer her questions. So I said, all right, what was your question? And she said, these two people just loved each other. Why was society so angry? And I thought, wow, when would I have thought she could read this book? Not when she was 10. But by the time she had developed maybe prejudices in her mind, where she had heard hatred, and this thing of herd hatred is very strong in children's lives. We have to be careful of what we're talking in front of children. Children think that they should hate Muslims. Children think that poor people steal, and all these stereotypes coming into their minds. So she had asked this question pre-prejudice, and I thought, you're never too young. Even your Dame story of the cow who wants to lay an egg could well be an alternate family and, kind of story.
Thank you so much, Paro. That was wonderful. Sivakumar, I wanted to ask you, one of the things about reading is that you have to concentrate. You have to immerse yourself in that book. There has to be focus, because otherwise you're not going to be a reader if you keep jumping up, flitting around. And did you find that in your work with children, did you see the difference between a reader, a child who did read, and a child who didn't? Did it help to concentrate, to discipline the mind?
Yes, I mean, it does, but I think one of the things is, like we were just hearing, children probably see a lot more than we
Imagine.
Yeah. Now, let me stick to the visual part. So when their responses might not be ours, or their reasons might not be there, I'll just tell you two little incidents. One was a young little boy, son of my friend. So we were looking at images, and a couple of them were of Rembrandt, who has this dark colors and so I was sitting near the door. We are just sitting by the door, and I was blocking the light. So he said, just move, let me see it, let there be more light, kind of thing. So it was a very interesting way of responding to the darkness in the painting. The other thing was that one of Subramanyan's books for children about the zoo, and he uses, as we had seen, minimum number of colors. So there were just three colors, kind of light ochreish brown and black, and then the white of the paper. Then I was showing this to my young son, and he recognized, which is not written in the book, but he recognized the kind of play of light within the zoo, because there are no trees painted, nothing, but just these colors changing, these two different colors, the proportions changing. And suddenly I realized he's noticing these shifts, and he's equating with shift of light. Now, this is something that I would not have expected children to notice. So, like
the power of observation.
Yes, and also the multiple possibilities, because images also contain multiple possibilities. So in a sense, maybe when you have a film, it tells a story of a certain kind, but each frame, each image also contains multiple possibilities. So children are very often sensitive to these possibilities. So I think that they do pay attention. They do focus much more. And also, if we interact with very young children, we notice by the age of 3 or so, they really notice all the social divisions. They notice, class relationships. Everything is seen by them. So I would think that a good story allows them to grapple with these things. And I think all the great works do that. And luckily in Bengal, we have quite a good
very
tradition of
rich.
that. Yeah.
Also, in Bengal, since you mentioned that, we have a very rich tradition of nonsense verse and stories, which is fascinating for children. Okay, we've just been through the pandemic. So children have been really seriously hampered socially. Their social interactions, there's a whole generation of school children who don't know how to socialize, how to interact with people, fight, get on with life, etc. And that was what was wonderful about the Enid Blytons, the Rowlings, the Harry Potter series, the loyalty, the values of friendship, being able to rise above fights, to come to each other's help. I think that maybe that is something that took a serious knock, which books also help in your communication with each other, your language skills, your social skills. So, Malini, let me ask you about this. Did you find that it affected, since you also have experience, adversely affect?
You mean the COVID situation?
And, books, do they help you come out of that? Because that's offering you a kind of escape somewhere. You're still part of friend circle, all the values of loyalty, sharing, fighting over somebody's tiffin, ratting on someone and being angry.
Yeah, so my COVID, we were all locked down. So what happened to Udan? By the way, let me just introduce Udan. Udan is a community, as I told you, of children and teachers, and we, children and mothers, fathers, and we do regular workshops, all kinds of workshops, and residential camps, and we run courses, and basically we hold hands. Okay, so karo jor hole acha tumi eta khete paro. COVID, we were trying to, like, within the group, we were trying to help each other in very many ways. And what happened in Udan is that with the small kids, I started writing. Of course, we had online little workshops, and we also did plays, as I was mentioning. I wrote plays for them with characters from the books. So everything from Obelix theke Podipishi, and they would all try to interact from their janala. So the name of the play was Roop Kathar Janala. So Rapunzel had this long hair full of lice, and Podipishi is very, what is this kind of stuff. So, so they pretty much enjoyed the whole thing, and they are familiar with these characters because they are reading. Maybe they had not read Podipishi, Bormir Baksha, but our children don't read Bangla at the end of the day. So I insist on writing in Bangla. So they would go and, okay, Malini Mashi has given me the role of Podipishi, so I have to go back and read Podipishi. I have to read who Obelix is, and I'll have to read who Mad Hatter is. So, they started reading, but I would say I would not know so much about the other children as much as I know about my kid. So because he is an avid reader, so I think it was good that he went back to his books a lot. I think it was bad too.
Yeah.
I think I do not see how books can compensate socializing. No. Okay, so I think, well, some kids read, some don't. So those who read, they found kind of...
I want to come in there. You said some kids read, some don't. Now, when Harry Potter happened, the first, it created a sensation. It was a phenomenon because reading amongst children, among students had gone down hugely. And I'm going to ask you this question, Madhurima. There was a huge plummeting habit of reading, but it really turned it around, Harry Potter. Now, I don't know if it lasted amongst that generation after that, but it certainly had different kind of powerful impact on that generation of students who wanted to read it, wanted to know what was happening, pre-ordered books, wanted to find out what the details were. So sorry?
It was wonderful and wonderfully mad.
I think it was wonderful, but I'm really asking that what is it that a writer for children needs to be conscious of to think that it can be a hook for a child to come to their book, to have that level of interest and fascination?
Harry Potter, J.K. Rowling was rejected 7 times by 7 different publishers. Because everybody thought that it was too dense, too dark, too complex for children to read. And children who like fantasy are young ones, and the target age of the stylistically were older. There was a mismatch until a marketing person realized what they had on their hands. And literally it went page by page that this one marketing person called somebody and said, listen, come and read this. Then somebody, and they, 1 page at a time, they read it. So let's not presume what children need and how we need to write it. Let's trust them more, as you say.
Well, true, but at the same time, why is it that some people didn't respond to a whole other series, a Percy Jackson series or something like that, the way they did? There's a certain universality about children's literature that is timeless. You read a Grimm's a fairy tale like The Ugly Duckling, that is going to be relevant throughout lives. You read something that is one of the most beautiful and poignant stories, Hans Christian Andersen, The Little Match Girl, right? That's a story, The Little Match Girl. And it can still bring tears to your eyes. And there is a message there. So I'm talking about that universality of that message, of that hook for children. What would you think can be done to do that, to achieve that?
From the heart is again, just digging into my own childhood memories, is not to take the child for granted, and not to assume that whatever I am writing for them or want to write for them is too complicated. So when I was writing this book, I went on and Nini is not a very likable child. I mean, she's actually quite brattish. She's having tantrums because of the way she perceives she's being displaced as the center of the universe. And she's so used to be, she's the only child in that household, and she's so used to be, the apple of everyone's eyes, that she really can't take her grandmother's success. And there is this dichotomy because they are actually the two people who love each other the most. So she's not very likable. It's not a cute story. There are bits and there are layers. I was at a school session recently, and I'll just quote two questions that really made my day. I was supposed to summarize the book, and I did that. And the first question was, is this set in London? And I stopped and I thought, where does that question come from? Because I think there is this concept that this sort of thing can't happen in our countries. So I said, look, miraculous things happen in Kolkata. They will happen all around you. Please go back to the elders in your house and ask them. And the second question was, there was this story about the grandmother's grandmother, about how she had been married as a girl of 9. And then one of the questions, very persistent question, was why had she been married at 9? So you can make them think even with seemingly casual remarks. And really, there is no reason you can't tell them about, social mores of the history of where they are and where they come from, and what happens and what still happens. You can make them think in any way you want. And as long as you don't consider them, you don't talk down to them. I hated it as a child when somebody did that to me. And as long as you don't talk down to them, I think they will respond to you with a lot of intelligence and with honesty.
I wanted to go back to that bit about the universal values. When we read the generation that read Enid Blyton, then the generation that read Harry Potter, Eragon, a much more adult generation who read Tolkien. Frankly, I don't think Tolkien is for children because there's so much that is truly dark and menacing, but it's a fascinating world all the same. There are certain values that are so important. For example, in Enid Blyton, they don't tell tales on each other. If they do, they're really stigmatized. They stick by each other. They go back to help each other in times of trouble. Even in Harry Potter, at the end, they go back to save somebody they've hated all their lives. And, Ron tells him, if I die trying to save him, I'm going to kill you anyway. And that's funny, but it's also very heartening. He wins a big prize money. But money is not important to them. He gives it away to the twins. Similarly, in Enid Blyton, money, the concentration on things rich, things which are material, that's not important. The simple pleasures are important. Midnight feasts, going on picnics, having adventure. That is a simple thing that appealed to people across generations. And it's almost as if Harry Potter brought it back in a slightly different form, but with all those values.
I think that any good story worth its salt says something of importance. And I don't think that children today, the stories for them need to be led by the value. It can be a moral story without moralizing. And it can be a story where obviously good triumphs over evil eventually. In this book, there's also another bratty boy, like the girl in your story, a real brat who thinks that a pimple on his nose is the end of the world. And he's being given a piece of homework to read up on Gandhi and try and be Gandhi for a day. And he says, I'm not going to do the homework. I'll make up some bakwas and present it to the teacher. I'm not going to do it. But then Indira Gandhi is assassinated and the riots come to his door, to the neighbors. And suddenly he has to dig deep and find his inner Gandhi, which he does. And he becomes a citizen of the country, of the world. And he takes, I mean, he invents his own satyagraha. So I think what all I'm saying is that any good story says something of value, but the value shouldn't be heavy on the child. You know?
So I'm a teacher trainer. So most often when I go to for the trainings, and I would ask the teachers that, because storytelling is a very important tool in classroom. So when I ask them, what are the stories that you can tell? Most of the time, those are the stories which has a lesson at the end, and which really scares me because they're so at times close-ended. Yeah, and there are 3-4 stories. I would also say a story can be sad. It can end in a very bitter way, but at the end of the day, as Paro had just mentioned, it has something to say, it has something to communicate, which would make the child think, going back to what Gayatri was saying. So this, I am almost terrified that our education system is kind of drive into the children's mind that there is a message everywhere and you have to learn that message and you have to respect that value. Values keep changing and values are wherever we are and what we are and how we grow, and it will differ. It is there. That is what is important, that I respect yours and you respect my value. That's
And I think the hook is natural. It's not something that you think about, whether it's the Christmas Carol or Oliver Twist. You can relate to it, or whether it's Mary Poppins. It's all charming, maybe. There may be a lesson in it. There may be a message in it, but it has to flow naturally. And it can be so powerful. You know, for example, you talked about adults and the way we look at it. In the West, you said somebody asked you, is this in London? Possibly because we in this country seem to think that once you're beyond a certain age, your life is over. They don't do that in the West. So this is something where she's starting not to be sacrificing all the time. She's not going to self-sacrifice. The money she gets at the end, she first tells Rini, it's all for you, whatever you want. And then she quietly says, well, maybe I'll buy that box of paints.
Yeah, because it's
That's
very normal
lesson.
for grandparents to think, well, when there aren't any grandparents, it's normal to think of the children. And when there are grandchildren, there is nobody else in the grandmother's universe, I think specifically. So obviously she gets the money, the grandmother, because she sells a painting. This is the first money she has ever earned in her whole life. So obviously it's special, and she wants to give it to her grandchild in the form of whatever, jewelry or whatever. And there is insistence on her part, but then there is counter pressure from a member of the family, her daughter-in-law, saying, this is the first money that Minima has earned. And it also showcases, I think, the way society has changed in 3 generations, because our children are very used to seeing mommy go out to work, mommy having money, mommy not asking anybody for money, mommy managing money at home, instead of saying, wait for your father to come home and I will ask whether we can buy you this. It doesn't happen anymore. So obviously Nini will not understand what the first paycheck means. And Minima has been hankering after these set of paints for months, but she feels they're too expensive, and she's refused her daughter-in-law's offer to buy her the set of paints because she feels it would be an imposition.
And that's also another lesson. You know, we tend to think, even as adults, that if we fail, it's always somebody else or something's fault. So for Nini, it was he had a better, bigger box of paint. And the lesson was it's nothing to do with that. You know, I am going to ask Paro. I think now we'll take questions after I get Paro to read just a couple of paras from her book. But I want to say one thing. Writing for children specifically, yes, maybe you need to be a little responsible in your thought and think, what can I do? How can I write? To first draw them, to hook them. And then what can I say to them that will be good for them? Enjoyable and good. I think those are the two operative words. And since we're talking about the 75th year of our independence, we're talking about future citizens and how to build them. I think it's important to talk about values not intrusively, but to let them be there for the child to choose from. We just have a couple of paragraphs and then questions if there are any.
It's wonderful to end the festival sort of on this note of we've been looking back 75 years, and with children's literature, we're looking ahead 75 years.
I just wanted to say, I'm touched upon it. I think laughter is so important. And
Yeah.
Sivakumar Rai, I mean, he was amazing.
Yeah.
The kind of hook that he had. Actually, in Bengali literature, we've had amazing
yes,
Tenida,
yes,
Sivakumar
yes.
Rai, Onik characters. Shotyajit Rai, the way he created characters. So
Yeah.
it's not for nothing that he
Yes,
headed the Nonsense Club.
Absolutely.
Sivakumar Rai, but he actually had the Nonsense Club.
So this is one of the characters, the Kashmiri Pandit girl. And she's alone in the school in the sense that her best friend isn't there in school and she's on her own. She's very painfully shy and also dabawa. She's very, very brought up to be quiet. The girls chattered away. They talked so fast that Shana missed most of the conversation. This group had many girls from Northeast India, but Shana didn't know whether they were all from the same place or different. Determined to join into the conversation, Shana asked as loudly as she could, "Are you all from the same place? Or are some of you Nagas, some Manipuri, Sikamis and all?" Everyone felt silent. They all turned to look at her as though noticing her for the first time. She could see the question, the bemusement on their faces. Of course, we are from the same place, the same state, even the same tribe. One of them almost sneered at her. "We don't hang with the Nagas and all." Nagas, almost spat out as if too dirty to keep in the mouth too long. Why? Why not? Slipped out of her before she could stop herself. They're different. They're weird. The blood was pounding in Shana's ears. But I'm different and weird too, for that matter. She was speaking in a voice that didn't reflect how much she was quaking inside. She was almost clapping inwardly at her insane courage. Look, the point is, we have a traditional enemy with Nagas. Our people and theirs have an enmity going way back. So we don't hang with them, simple. Traditional enmity. The words thumped within Shana. The image of Huma's face rose up unbidden. Huma, who had run down the hillside to say goodbye to Shana when the Kashmiri Pandits were fleeing after Shana's father had been killed in a grenade attack. How did we let this happen? She wondered. She had turned away. She had thought of her best friend as her enemy. Why did we let this happen? Nobody's letting it happen. It's just the way it is, and there's nothing that we can do about it. Why not? Asked Shana. Why not? Why are we carrying traditional enmities? We're children. Can't we make the change?
I just want to say one thing taking out from that. It's adults who transmit their feelings to children, perhaps inadvertently, but so harmfully. And a friend of mine is sitting here today. I'll just repeat a story she said, really funny story, about a young boy who was very dark. And this was a nephew of hers who wasn't, or a cousin who wasn't, who was fair. And he would tell this boy every day, because he didn't understand anything about dark, fair. He just thought they should be the same. He said, when are you going to bring that cherry blossom and color me? You know, like boot polish black. And it wasn't said with any malice, but that is how innocent and harmless and wonderful it can be, and how complicated we as adults make it and shouldn't. You know, I think that's where writing like this can make such a difference. And the story I told about this child, that's innocence. There's a certain innocence in children, no matter what, that you can't wash away. There's another story, and this is personal. A young boy, a nephew, went to his uncle's place in London. I mean, this is somebody I know. And the uncle was full of how wonderful that new car was. Must have cost a few crores. And he went and showed him after dinner. Now, come on, you're going to see this car. The lights go like this does this does that. But before that, after dinner, he was made to wash his dishes, etc., etc., which he didn't like. He'd never done it. But his mother told him, you'd better do it. And he came down, he saw this, then he turned around and he asked his uncle a very innocent question. He said, what's the use, Jetu, of having a car that can sing and dance and do everything if I have to wash my own dishes? But, you know, that is what innocence is about. It came from a place that wasn't harmful. He just couldn't rationalize that. What is it with this big showing off with a car when the work has to be done? It's so much more difficult here.
Where I had an instance where I had, with very young children, 2.5-year-olds, used the word diet. And I thought, oh, they're not going to know what this word means. So I said, do you know what diet means? They all knew. So I said, what does it mean? They said, when mommy stops eating. So I said, why does she stop eating? She says, because she's fat. I said, but so what? I said, but she looks stupid if she's fat. Oh. You know? And so I wrote a book called Elephants Don't Diet on body image, basically.
Well, they're on even now, you know, when you talk about a Mercedes Benz or whatever. But thank God, actually, I'm not sure. I shouldn't say this. I think children, as a child, we were so unaware. It's maybe a little different now. But even now,
I have no clue. I don't watch the TV, so I have no idea. But what I would like to state here is going back to the same thing about adding values, in the sense that, you know, when we are saying that this is an advertisement which shows jealousy, and so we shouldn't show this to our children. But as a mother of a 16-year-old, I had seen him being jealous several times. I've seen so many children being jealous several times. We are jealous. All of us are jealous. So that's just one of the traits that we have as a human being. So the idea is not to shun it, probably. If I write about it, I will not shun the idea of jealousy. I would deal with it. That's what I would look at it. That the আমাদের মধ্যে সবার মধ্যে এই jealousy factorটা আছে, নানা কারণে আমরা jealous হই, কিন্তু what do we think about it? Let us deliberate on this. So that is how I would like to look at it, because there are so many things that we really cannot take out of this world. You know, we can't expect children not to watch the media, not to watch the phone. They will do it all the time. What matters to me as an educator, as an author, is how much you're open-minded to read through those lines which are there in your phone or on the television, and how openly can you discuss that and understand wherein মানে তোমার মধ্যে কোথায় jealousy-টা আটকে আছে, সেটা কি rational নাকি সেটা irrational, সেইটাকে বোঝার ক্ষমতাটা যাতে থাকে।
আমি আসলে গল্প বলার গল্পটা এর মধ্যে লিখেছি, কেননা দিদিমা ঠাকুমাকে নিয়ে যেহেতু গল্প, দিদিমা ঠাকুমারা থ্যাঙ্কফুলি এখনো গল্প বলেন, মাঝে মাঝে একই গল্প বারবার বলেন, but I think that then becomes a very cherished memory. So she told me stories, really good ones. Some were ghost stories, all shivery and delicious, but mostly stories about her childhood and her huge family. She had so many aunts and uncles and cousins and grandmothers and their sisters that I got mixed up every time. It was all very clear to her inside her head, like a map. But I got confused with Mejo Mashi and Boro Mami and somebody's nonod and somebody else's something. Half the time, I couldn't understand who was related to whom and how. She told the same stories over and over again, but I still couldn't remember. But I think this is a very important tradition. And I think আমরা যদি অডিও বুকসকে এতটা গুরুত্ব দিই, তাহলে আমরা ওরাল স্টোরি টেলিং এর ট্র্যাডিশনটাকে কেন দেব না? It is simply the same thing. It may, it's like আগেকার দিনের কটন নিয়ে গিয়ে ল্যানকাস্টারের মিল থেকে কাপড় বুনে এদেশে ফেরত নিয়ে আসা. So I think it really needs to be put into context.
And it is put into context, especially with epics like Ramayana and Mahabharata. Most of us who know about it have been told the stories by our grandmothers and then been hooked on to reading it, found it interesting enough. So that was looking at the future citizens of India, maybe in the next 50 years, through writing, through books, the way they're shaping them. Thank you so much, all of you. Thank you for sharing this with me. And thank you to Nabanna Earth Weekend. It was wonderful to be here. Thank you for having us.